Part 1. The Roses of Blackthorn. End. There were villages that encouraged secrets. Blackthorn End was one of them. It lay tucked quietly between rolling green hills and narrow winding roads, where hedges grew thick enough to hide almost anything. The cottages leaned slightly with age, church bells carried softly through morning mist, and every garden seemed carefully arranged to suggest peace and respectability. Yet Miss Marple had long ago learned that villages which appeared most peaceful often conceal the deepest resentments. She arrived in Blackthorn End on an unusually warm September afternoon, carrying her small suitcase and observing everything with the mild, attentive expression that caused people to underestimate her so consistently. A row of late roses bloomed beside the station platform. Beautiful flowers, though roses, Miss Marple reflected privately, possessed thorns for a reason. Waiting near the gate stood Mrs. Edith Penrith, an old acquaintance from St. Mary Mead who had retired to Blackthorn End several years earlier after inheriting a small cottage from a widowed cousin. Edith Penrith waved enthusiastically. "Jane, at last." Miss Marple smiled warmly. "My dear Edith." They embraced briefly before Edith immediately lowered her voice with unmistakable excitement. "You've arrived at precisely the wrong moment," Miss Marple blinked mildly. "That sounds ominous." "It is." Edith adjusted her gloves dramatically. "There's been a dreadful scene at Wycliffe House." "Interesting indeed." Miss Marple allowed herself to be guided toward the waiting motor car. As they drove slowly through the village lanes, Edith spoke with growing eagerness. "You've heard of Helena Wycliffe, naturally." "I don't believe so." Edith looked almost shocked. "My dear Jane, the woman has terrorized Blackthorn End for 20 years. Interesting description. In what way? She knew everyone's weaknesses." Edith sniffed disapprovingly, and enjoyed reminding them of it. Miss Marple folded gloved hands thoughtfully. Such people rarely died beloved. "What sort of woman was she?" "Rich," Edith answered immediately. "Sharp-tongued, controlling, impossible." Then, after brief hesitation, "though very clever." Interesting indeed. Very clever women often inspired unusual hostility in villages. And what exactly occurred at Wycliffe House? Edith slowed the motor car slightly as they rounded a bend. "There was a charity fete yesterday afternoon in the gardens," her voice lowered. "Helena Wycliffe was found dead beside the rosebed shortly after sunset." Miss Marple looked quietly toward her. "Dead." "Yes. How terrible." "Police believe she slipped in the dark and struck her head against the stone path." Edith paused significantly. "But nobody seems entirely convinced." "Interesting indeed. Very interesting." "Why not?" "Because Helena Wycliffe never walked alone in her garden after dark." "Ah, that mattered." Miss Marple turned thoughtfully toward the countryside passing beyond the window. Gardens often revealed more about human nature than drawing rooms ever did. People behaved differently among growing things, more honestly perhaps. "And Wycliffe House?" she asked softly. Edith pointed ahead. "There." The estate emerged gradually beyond towering hedges and ancient oak trees. Wycliffe House itself appeared handsome rather than grand, a large Georgian manor built from pale stone partially hidden behind enormous brick walls overgrown with ivy and climbing roses. The garden wall stretched impressively far along the lane, high, old, and extraordinarily private. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple noticed immediately that portions of the brickwork appeared newer than others, as though repaired repeatedly over many years. People repaired walls carefully when they feared what might emerge through them. Edith followed her gaze. Helena practically worshipped that garden. "My dear," Miss Marple murmured softly, "people usually worship the things they wish controlling." Edith gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. "You haven't changed at all." "No," Miss Marple agreed pleasantly. "Nor has human nature." By evening, Miss Marple had learned considerably more about Helena Wycliffe than the dead woman herself might have appreciated. Blackthorn End possessed the same talent all villages shared, the ability to criticize someone endlessly, while simultaneously depending upon them. Helena Wycliffe funded church repairs, organized charities, and employed half the village through estate work. Yet nearly everyone spoke of her with visible resentment. "She humiliated people," Edith explained over supper. "Politely, of course, which somehow made it worse." Interesting indeed. How long had she lived at Wycliffe House? Since marrying Arthur Wycliffe before the war, Edith lowered her voice instinctively, though some people say the marriage wasn't entirely happy. Some people usually do. Edith smiled reluctantly. Yes. Well, she hesitated. Arthur died rather suddenly 12 years ago. Interesting. How? Heart attack officially. Officially. Always an interesting word. Before Miss Marple could continue, the front bell rang sharply. Moments later, Edith's maid entered. Inspector Hale to see you, madam. The man who entered carried himself with the quiet alertness common among capable policemen. Tall, perhaps early 40s, dark-haired, with intelligent, tired eyes and an expression suggesting recent frustration. Forgive the interruption, he said politely. Mrs. Penrith mentioned Miss Marple might be visiting. Interesting indeed. He knew her reputation already. Miss Marple smiled gently. How do you do, Inspector? Very well, thank you. His tone suggested otherwise. Though Blackthorn End currently disagrees. Edith gestured impatiently toward a chair. Sit down, Thomas, you look dreadful. Inspector Hale accepted tea with visible gratitude. Miss Marple observed him quietly. Good policemen listened more than they spoke. This one listened constantly. You're unconvinced Helena Wycliffe's death was accidental, she said softly. The inspector glanced toward her sharply. No. Why? He hesitated only briefly. There were certain irregularities. Interesting indeed. Such as? A gardening glove found torn near the wall, Hale frowned slightly, and signs someone recently disturbed the soil beside the eastern rose beds. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Freshly disturbed soil, gardens buried many things. And Helena Wycliffe herself. There were bruises on her wrist inconsistent with a simple fall. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Edith gasped softly. You think someone attacked her? I think, said Inspector Hale carefully, that somebody wanted the death appearing accidental. Miss Marple folded her hands thoughtfully. How many people attended the fete? Nearly the entire village. Convenient indeed. Crowds created excellent opportunities for murder. And who discovered the body? The gardener. Interesting. What sort of man is he? Inspector Hale's expression shifted faintly. Devoted to Helena Wycliffe. He paused. Perhaps excessively so. Another interesting detail. Name? Samuel Greaves. The inspector leaned slightly forward now. There's something else. Miss Marple waited patiently. Several witnesses claim Helena argued with someone shortly before her death. Who? We don't know. Hale rubbed tired eyes briefly. The gardens were crowded, music playing, people wandering everywhere. He hesitated. But one child mentioned seeing a man climb over the eastern wall after sunset. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Because respectable adults generally used gates. Miss Marple glanced thoughtfully toward the darkening windows. What lies beyond the eastern wall? Old woodland, mostly. Inspector Hale paused. And an abandoned cottage. Abandoned places always interested her. Before further questions continued, Edith suddenly spoke. There's also the matter of the gate. The inspector sighed quietly. Yes. Miss Marple looked between them. What gate? The small garden gate built into the eastern wall. Edith lowered her voice instinctively. Helena kept it locked constantly. Why? No one knows. Interesting indeed. People locked doors for reasons, and secret entrances through garden walls suggested meetings best hidden from public view. Inspector Hale rose slowly. I'll likely remain occupied at Wycliffe House for several days. He glanced toward Miss Marple politely. Though I sincerely hope Blackthorn End doesn't involve you too deeply in matters, Miss Marple smiled faintly. My dear Inspector, villages involve everyone eventually. After he departed, silence settled briefly through the drawing room. Then Edith spoke quietly. There's something I didn't mention earlier. Interesting. What is it? Edith hesitated. Years ago, before Helena's husband died, a local girl disappeared. Miss Marple looked up slowly. Disappeared? Yes. Edith lowered her voice almost to a whisper now. She was last seen near the Wycliffe garden wall. The locked garden gate rain arrived during the night. By morning, Blackthorn End lay beneath a grey autumn sky, while mist drifted heavily across the narrow lanes and fields beyond the village. Water clung to hedges like glass, and the church bell sounded strangely distant through the damp air. Miss Marple sat beside Edith Penrith's breakfast table, stirring tea thoughtfully. "A vanished girl," she murmured. "Villagers seldom forget such things entirely." Edith buttered toast distractedly. "They tried to. Interesting indeed." "Tell me properly." Edith hesitated. "It happened 22 years ago. Shortly before the war ended. The girl's name was Lily Harrow." She lowered her voice instinctively despite nobody else being present. "She worked occasionally at Wycliffe House." "How old?" 19, I think." Edith frowned faintly. "Pretty little thing. Quiet." "And she simply vanished?" "Yes." Edith glanced toward the rain-streaked windows. "People assumed she ran away eventually." "Did they believe it?" "No." "Interesting indeed. Very interesting." Miss Marple folded her hands. "What was the general opinion?" Edith sighed softly. "That Arthur Wycliffe knew more than he admitted. And Helena Wycliffe spent 20 years guarding the same estate afterward." "Interesting." Before Miss Marple could continue, the telephone rang sharply in the hallway. Edith rose immediately. Moments later, her voice drifted back from the corridor. "Yes. Yes. She's here." A pause, then, "Of course." Edith returned, looking uneasy. "That was Inspector Hale." She sat slowly. "There's been another incident. Interesting indeed." "What sort of incident?" "The village schoolmaster claims he saw someone climbing over the eastern garden wall last night." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened immediately. "During the rain?" "Yes." "Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Because people did not climb garden walls in darkness and heavy rain without powerful reason. And where is this schoolmaster now?" "At Wycliffe House, apparently." Edith hesitated. "The inspector asked whether you might care accompanying me there." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "My dear Edith, policemen only request elderly ladies when matters become genuinely troublesome." Wycliffe House appeared even more imposing beneath rain and mist. The enormous brick garden wall stretched along the lane like something protecting an old fortress rather than flower beds. Ivy crawled thickly across portions of the stone, though the eastern side looked oddly bare in places. Repaired recently, perhaps. Interesting indeed. A police motorcar stood near the gates while several villagers lingered nearby, pretending not to watch events too closely. Villagers excelled at pretending. Inspector Hale greeted them near the entrance path. "You came. You sounded concerned," Miss Marple observed gently. "I am." He led them toward the rear gardens. The famous Wycliffe garden revealed itself gradually through drifting rain. Even neglected by autumn weather, it remained beautiful. Long gravel paths curved between enormous rose beds while climbing vines twisted around ancient stone arches, while statues stood half hidden beneath wet ivy. A fountain trickled softly near the centre lawn. Yet despite the beauty, Miss Marple felt something uncomfortable immediately. The garden seemed too controlled, too precise, like a carefully arranged stage-hiding disorder just beyond view. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale guided them toward the eastern wall. There. A narrow wooden gate sat built directly into the brickwork, almost invisible beneath climbing ivy. Heavy iron lock. Fresh scratches near the handle. Miss Marple stepped closer. "Recently used?" "Yes," the inspector pointed downward. Mud marked the stones beneath the gate, and beside them, a torn piece of dark fabric caught upon a rusted nail. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. "The schoolmaster saw someone climbing over here shortly after midnight," Hale explained. "A man, apparently. Did he recognize him?" "No," the inspector grimaced. "Rain obscured visibility." Miss Marple examined the wall carefully. One section near the gate appeared newer than surrounding brickwork. Not merely repaired, altered. Interesting. "Who maintains the gardens now?" she asked. "Samuel Greaves, mostly." "Ah, yes. The devoted gardener." As though summoned by the mention of his name, a man emerged from nearby rose beds carrying pruning shears. Tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps late 50s. His weathered face carried the exhausted expression of someone sleeping poorly for many years. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale introduced them quietly. "Mr. Greaves," the gardener nodded stiffly. "Miss Marple." His voice remained calm enough, yet his eyes moved immediately toward the gate behind them. Fear. Interesting. Miss Marple smiled gently. "You cared greatly for Mrs. Wycliffe." Samuel Greaves looked away toward the rain-soaked roses. She deserved better than village gossip. Interesting answer. Not grief first, defensiveness. And how long did you work here? Nearly 30 years. Then you knew Arthur Wycliffe as well. The gardener's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale watched him carefully. Mr. Greaves discovered Mrs. Wycliffe's body. Yes. How? Samuel hesitated briefly. I was locking the garden paths after the fete. And? I found her beside the eastern roses. Miss Marple observed his hands. Strong hands. Gardener's hands. One thumb carried fresh scratches. Interesting. Did Mrs. Wycliffe seem troubled recently? She asked softly. The gardener gave a short, bitter laugh. She trusted nobody. Interesting indeed. Why not? Because people always wanted something from her. Before further questions continued, another figure approached rapidly across the wet lawn. A woman, perhaps in her early 30s, elegantly dressed despite village surroundings, dark hair pinned neatly, sharp, intelligent eyes. Miss Marple noticed tension immediately between her and Samuel Greaves. Interesting. Inspector Hale sighed softly. Miss Eleanor Wycliffe. Family. The woman nodded coolly toward them. I hope the police aren't still trampling Mother's roses unnecessarily. Interesting indeed. Not sorrow, irritation. Miss Marple studied her quietly. Your mother's death must be deeply distressing. Eleanor Wycliffe's expression remained composed. My mother was difficult to distress on anyone's behalf except her own. Interesting honesty. Inspector Hale spoke carefully. Miss Wycliffe inherited the estate after Helena's death. Now matters clarified further. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Ellen noticed Miss Marple observing her. You disapprove? My dear, said Miss Marple pleasantly, I merely observe. The younger woman almost smiled. Dangerous habit in villages. Yes. Their eyes met briefly. Miss Marple sensed intelligence immediately, and anger carefully controlled beneath it. Interesting. Then Eleanor glanced toward the eastern wall. Still examining the gate? Inspector Hale nodded. It appears someone entered through it recently. That gate should have been sealed years ago. Miss Marple looked toward her sharply. Why? For the first time Eleanor hesitated. Because my mother became obsessed with it after Lily Harrow disappeared. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. She believed someone used the gate secretly? Yes? Who? Eleanor laughed softly without amusement. That changed constantly depending on Mother's mood. Interesting answer. Not denial. Miss Marple turned once more toward the wall itself. Rainwater slid slowly down old bricks darkened with age. And there, nearly hidden beneath ivy, she noticed faint marks scratched into the stone. Letters. Very old. Carefully carved once with something sharp. L.H. Interesting indeed. Lily Harrow. Miss Marple stepped closer. Inspector Hale noticed immediately. What is it? She touched the faded initials lightly. Someone remembered her. Silence settled briefly among them. Then Samuel Greaves spoke unexpectedly. She used sitting here evenings. All eyes turned toward him. The gardener stared toward the wall without seeing the present at all. She liked roses. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple's voice remained soft. You knew Lily Harrow well. Samuel Greaves looked suddenly alarmed. No. Too quickly. Much too quickly. Inspector Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. Mr. Greaves? Before the inspector continued, shouting erupted suddenly near the front gardens. A constable came hurrying across the lawn through rain and mud. Sir, Inspector Hale turned sharply. What is it? The constable looked visibly shaken. The schoolmaster's gone missing. The man who saw too much. The rain intensified steadily throughout the afternoon. By the time Inspector Hale returned from the village centre, and water streamed heavily from his coat while mud stained the hems of his trousers. Miss Marple and Edith waited in the drawing room at Wycliffe House, where Eleanor Wycliffe had reluctantly permitted them tea despite clearly preferring solitude. Or perhaps control. Interesting indeed. The room itself reflected Helena Wycliffe perfectly, elegant but cold. Every object carefully placed, every surface immaculate, yet no genuine warmth existed anywhere. Portraits lined the walls, Generations of stern-faced Wycliffes staring down with quiet judgment. Miss Marple noticed one painting positioned above the fireplace. Arthur Wycliffe, handsome once, dark-haired, proud, and possessing the same hard eyes as his daughter Eleanor. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale entered looking grim. No sign of him. Edith gasped softly. Oh dear. The inspector removed wet gloves impatiently. The schoolmaster never returned home last night. His bicycle was found near the eastern lane about half a mile from here. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Miss Marple folded her hands quietly. Any evidence of violence? Not yet. But you believe this connected to Helena Wycliffe's death? Hale hesitated only briefly. Yes. Because men rarely vanished immediately after claiming they witnessed suspicious activity. Interesting indeed. Eleanor Wycliffe stood near the window, staring toward the rain-covered gardens. My mother always said secrets poisoned this house eventually. Interesting remark. Miss Marple observed her carefully. And did you believe her? No. Eleanor laughed faintly without humour. I thought she enjoyed dramatics, yet something in her voice suggested uncertainty now. Inspector Hale turned toward her. Miss Wycliffe, I'd like asking again about the eastern gate. A shadow crossed Eleanor's expression instantly. I already explained. Mother kept it locked constantly. Did she ever say why? No. Interesting indeed. Not entirely truthful, perhaps. Miss Marple watched carefully. People rarely lied well about old fears. Before further discussion continued, Samuel Greaves appeared silently at the drawing-room door. Inspector? The gardener's face looked unusually pale. What is it? Hale asked sharply. There's something you should see. The eastern gardens appeared strangely dim beneath heavy rain clouds. Samuel led them through winding gravel paths toward the far wall where enormous climbing roses twisted thickly over old brick. There, he said quietly. At first Miss Marple noticed nothing unusual. Then she saw it. Fresh earth. A narrow patch beside the wall where soil appeared recently disturbed despite the rain. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale crouched immediately. When did this happen? Samuel shook his head. It wasn't here yesterday. Miss Marple moved closer slowly. The disturbed soil stretched roughly 6 feet long. Not gardening work. Too hurried. Too uneven. Interesting. Inspector Hale's expression darkened visibly. Constable? The young officer stepped forward nervously. Sir? Fetch shovels. Silence settled heavily through the rain-soaked garden. Eleanor Wycliffe stared toward the fresh earth with visible discomfort. This is absurd. Interesting response. Not confusion. Fear, perhaps. Miss Marple glanced toward Samuel Greaves. The gardener looked physically ill. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Mr. Greaves, she said gently, you've seen something similar before. His eyes snapped toward her instantly. No. Too quickly again. The inspector noticed it as well. Samuel. The gardener swallowed hard. Rain dripped steadily from nearby rose branches. Then quietly, years ago, after Lily disappeared, there were rumours. What sort of rumours? Hale asked sharply. Samuel hesitated painfully. That Arthur Wycliffe buried something in the gardens. Silence crashed through the rain. Edith whispered faintly, Oh God. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale straightened slowly. Did Helena Wycliffe believe that? Yes. Why say nothing to police? Samuel laughed bitterly. Because this village worshipped Arthur Wycliffe. His weathered face tightened with old resentment. Rich men rarely become suspects here. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Before further questions continued, the constable returned carrying tools. Inspector Hale removed his coat. Start digging. The sound of shovels cutting wet earth echoed softly through the garden. Nobody spoke. Rain continued falling steadily while mud darkened around their shoes. Miss Marple watched the faces instead. Eleanor tense and pale. Samuel Greaves rigid with dread. Inspector Hale grimly focused. Interesting indeed. After several minutes, one constable suddenly froze. Sir, the shovel had struck something solid. Silence. Hale stepped forward immediately. Carefully now. Mud peeled slowly away beneath trembling hands. Then, cloth emerged. Dark fabric. rotten with age. Edith turned away sharply. Oh, heavens! Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale crouched lower. Human remains. Old. Very old. Miss Marple felt the atmosphere of the garden change instantly. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. As though Wycliffe House itself had expected this moment eventually. The inspector exhaled slowly. Dear God. Samuel Greaves closed his eyes. Eleanor whispered faintly, No. Miss Marple studied the shallow grave carefully. Not professional burial. Hurried, desperate, and very close to the wall. Interesting indeed. Because whoever hid the body wanted quick concealment rather than permanence. Yet gardens remembered disturbances longer than people expected. Inspector Hale rose slowly. We'll need a forensic team immediately. Eleanor suddenly spoke sharply. This proves nothing. Interesting response again. Not horror at discovering human remains. Fear of implications. Miss Marple turned toward her gently. My dear, somebody buried a body in your garden. That doesn't mean my father. She stopped abruptly. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale's eyes narrowed. You already assumed it involved Arthur Wycliffe. Silence. Rainwater slid slowly down Eleanor's pale face unnoticed. Then quietly, My mother believed he killed Lily Harrow. Edith gasped. You never said that. No. Eleanor stared toward the grave helplessly. Because Mother also believed impossible things. Interesting, Miss Marple spoke softly. Did Helena Wycliffe ever explain why she suspected her husband? Eleanor hesitated painfully. She found letters? Ah, interesting indeed. From Lily Harrow? Yes, to Arthur. Silence settled heavily once more. Inspector Hale's voice remained calm. Love letters? Eleanor laughed bitterly. Not exactly. Miss Marple watched her carefully. Threats, then. For the first time, genuine shock crossed Eleanor's face. How did you— My dear, Miss Marple said gently, young women rarely threaten older married men unless frightened. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Samuel Greaves suddenly turned away from the grave entirely. Enough! The inspector looked sharply toward him. Mr. Greaves? The gardener's face had become grey with strain. She deserved better than this. Interesting remark. Not Lily? Helena. Miss Marple noticed immediately. You cared greatly for Mrs. Wycliffe. Samuel stared toward the rain-soaked roses. She spent 20 years trying uncovering truth. And did she? Silence. Then quietly. Yes. Ah, there it was. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale stepped closer immediately. What truth? Samuel's weathered hands tightened violently around the gardening shears he still carried. That Lily Harrow never left Blackthorn End. Silence crashed through the garden once more, because now they all understood what likely rested beneath the disturbed earth beside the wall. The missing village girl, hidden among roses for over 20 years. Then suddenly Miss Marple noticed something else entirely. Near the grave itself, half buried in mud, lay a small silver object exposed by the digging. Interesting. She bent carefully and lifted it free. A locket. Very old. Tiny initials engraved across the front. L.H. Inspector Hale looked sharply toward her. Lily Harrow. Miss Marple opened the locket gently. Inside rested 2 miniature photographs. One showed Lily herself. The other, Arthur Wycliffe. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. But what truly caught Miss Marple's attention was not the photographs. It was the folded scrap of paper hidden carefully behind them. A note, protected all these years inside silver. The writing had faded badly with time and moisture. Yet one sentence remained readable. If anything happens to me, ask Helena about the gate. Silence settled coldly across Wycliffe Garden. Miss Marple closed the locket slowly, because suddenly Helena Wycliffe's death no longer looked like murder alone. It looked like silencing Helena's secret. The discovery of Lily Harrow's body shattered Blackthorn End completely. By evening, the entire village pulsed with whispers. Curtains twitched constantly. Shopkeepers paused conversations when customers entered. Even the church vicar abandoned his usual sermons about forgiveness in favour of vague remarks concerning truth eventually revealing itself. Villagers enjoyed scandal almost as much as they feared it. Miss Marple sat quietly beside Edith Penrith's sitting room fire, while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Inspector Hale arrived shortly after dusk, carrying the exhausted expression of a man who had spent the day surrounded by too many frightened people. "Well," Edith announced immediately, "I suppose Arthur Wickliffe truly murdered the girl after all." The inspector removed wet gloves carefully. "Perhaps. Interesting indeed." Miss Marple looked up mildly. "You're unconvinced?" Hale gave a faint humourless smile. "Miss Marple, one learns caution in police work." He accepted tea gratefully before continuing, especially when convenient explanations appear too quickly. "Interesting indeed. Very sensible." "What troubles you?" Miss Marple asked softly. "The timing." Hale sat heavily near the fire. "Someone murdered Helena Wickliffe days before Lily Harrow's body surfaced. And you believe those events connected?" "Yes." Miss Marple folded her knitting thoughtfully. "As do I." Edith frowned. "But surely Arthur killed Lily." "Possibly," said Miss Marple gently, "but dead men frequently attract crimes convenient for the living." "Interesting indeed." Inspector Hale nodded slowly. "Exactly." He removed several papers from his satchel. "We searched Helena Wickliffe's private study this afternoon. Interesting. And?" "We found correspondence hidden inside a locked desk drawer." Hale hesitated briefly. "Helena had been investigating Lily Harrow's disappearance privately for years. Interesting indeed. Very interesting." Miss Marple accepted the documents carefully. Most contained ordinary estate records, but among them rested several older letters written in delicate slanting handwriting. Lily Harrow's letters. Miss Marple read silently. "Mr. Wickliffe promised helping me leave Blackthorn End before the baby comes." Interesting indeed. "Very interesting," she continued reading. "Mrs. Wickliffe says she'll protect me if I trust her." "Ah, that changed matters considerably. Helena Wickliffe had not merely known about Lily. She had tried helping her. Interesting." Inspector Hale watched her closely. "You see the complication." "Yes," Edith blinked in confusion. "What complication?" Miss Marple looked thoughtfully toward the fire. "My dear Edith, if Helena Wickliffe attempted protecting Lily Harrow, then Arthur Wickliffe may not have been her enemy at all." Silence settled briefly. Inspector Hale nodded grimly. "There's more." He removed another paper. This was hidden separately from the other letters. Miss Marple examined it carefully. A diary page, written by Helena herself. "Arthur says the child changes everything. He wants the matter buried permanently before the village learns truth." "Interesting indeed. Very interesting," Edith gasped softly. "The child?" "Yes," Miss Marple murmured quietly. "There was a child involved." Inspector Hale leaned forward. No record exists of Lily Harrow giving birth." "Interesting." Which suggested one of two possibilities. Either the baby died unnoticed, or someone ensured no official record remained. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened slightly. "Inspector, has anyone identified Lily's remains formally yet?" "Not completely. The doctor believes she was approximately 5 months pregnant when she died." "Ah, there it was. Interesting indeed." The room fell silent again. Rain whispered steadily against the glass while the fire crackled softly between them. Then Miss Marple asked quietly, "What became of Helena's own children?" Inspector Hale blinked slightly. "Only one survived." "Eleanor?" "Only one?" "Yes." He consulted notes briefly. "There was another child born shortly after the war, a son apparently." Hale frowned faintly. "But he died in infancy." "Interesting. Very interesting indeed." Miss Marple said nothing immediately. Human beings lied constantly about inconvenient births and deaths, especially wealthy families protecting reputation. Edith noticed her expression. "What are you thinking?" "My dear," said Miss Marple softly, "timing matters enormously in villages." Inspector Hale straightened slightly. "You believe Helena's dead infant may somehow connect to Lily Harrow's child?" "Perhaps." "Interesting indeed. Because women grieving children often behaved unpredictably, protectively, desperately." Then another thought surfaced sharply. "Inspector," Miss Marple asked quietly, "who inherited Arthur Wickliffe's estate after his death?" "Helena, initially, then Eleanor. And if Eleanor had not existed," the inspector paused, "a distant cousin, perhaps." "Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Inheritance, family legitimacy, hidden pregnancy. Now the pattern deepened considerably. Before further discussion continued, the front bell rang sharply downstairs. Moments later, Edith's maid entered nervously. "There's a woman asking for Miss Marple?" "Interesting indeed." "Who?" "She wouldn't give her name, madam." Inspector Hale immediately frowned. "At this hour?" Miss Marple rose calmly. "Perhaps someone finally wishes speaking honestly." The woman waiting in the hallway appeared perhaps mid-40s, though hardship had aged her considerably. Dark coat, rain-soaked gloves, and frightened eyes. Very frightened eyes. Interesting indeed. When she noticed Inspector Hale, she almost turned to leave. Miss Marple spoke gently. "My dear, nobody here intends harming you." The woman hesitated painfully, then quietly, "I knew Lily Harrow." "Ah, well, interesting indeed." "Very interesting." Inspector Hale guided her toward the drawing room immediately. Once seated near the fire, the woman introduced herself reluctantly. "Rose Benton," Miss Marple observed her carefully. "Nervous hands, exhaustion, and something else beneath the fear. Guilt." "How did you know Lily?" Hale asked calmly. "We worked together briefly at Wycliffe House." "And?" Rose twisted damp gloves tightly. "She told me things before she disappeared." "Interesting indeed." "What sort of things?" Rose looked toward Miss Marple helplessly. She was frightened. "Of Arthur Wycliffe?" "No." Silence. Inspector Hale leaned forward sharply. "Then who?" Rose swallowed hard. "Mrs. Wycliffe." "Interesting indeed." "Very interesting." Edith stared. "That's impossible." "No," said Miss Marple softly. Not impossible." "Because frightened young girls often misunderstood powerful women trying to help them. Or perhaps Helena truly frightened Lily for entirely different reasons." Rose continued shakily. "Lily believed Helena wanted taking the baby away." "Ah, interesting." Miss Marple felt the entire shape of the mystery shifting subtly again. "Did Helena Wycliffe have children then?" "Yes," Rose nodded weakly. "Her baby boy had just died." Silence settled heavily through the room. Inspector Hale spoke quietly now. "And Lily thought Helena intended keeping her child." Rose's eyes filled faintly with tears. "She said Mrs. Wycliffe became obsessed with the pregnancy after losing her own son." "Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Human grief again. Always dangerous when mixed with desperation." Did Lily love Arthur Wycliffe?" Miss Marple asked softly. Rose hesitated. "I think she pitied him." Interesting answer. "Not romance, then, perhaps. Something more complicated." Before further questions continued, Rose suddenly whispered, "There's something else." Miss Marple waited patiently. "Lily met someone secretly through the eastern gate." Inspector Hale straightened immediately. "Who?" "I don't know." Rose shook her head helplessly. "But Helena discovered it." "Ah." There it was again. The gate. Always the gate. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. "Did Arthur know?" Hale asked sharply. "Yes." "And?" Rose closed her eyes briefly. "The night Lily disappeared." Her voice trembled violently now. There was shouting near the garden wall. Silence filled the room completely. "What sort of shouting?" Miss Marple asked gently. "Helena screaming at someone." Rose pressed trembling fingers against her mouth. "And afterward?" "Lily vanished." Inspector Hale spoke carefully. "You believe Helena Wycliffe killed her." Rose looked utterly miserable. "I don't know what to believe any more." Miss Marple studied the frightened woman quietly. No. Rose Benton did believe something. Something she feared speaking aloud even now. Interesting indeed. Then suddenly Rose whispered one final sentence that changed everything. "I saw Helena carrying a baby through the eastern gate the following morning." The child beyond the wall. For several moments after Rose Benton's revelation, nobody spoke. The fire crackled softly in Edith Penrith's drawing room while rain drifted steadily against the windows beyond. Yet the atmosphere inside the room had changed completely. A baby! He carried through the eastern gate by Helena de Wycliffe the morning after Lily Harrow disappeared. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale broke the silence first. "You're certain?" Rose Benton nodded weakly. "Yes." "What time was this?" "Very early, just after dawn." Her frightened eyes moved toward Miss Marple. "I'd gone to the village bakery before work." "And Helena was alone?" Rose hesitated. I thought so at first. Interesting. Miss Marple watched her carefully. But not afterward. No, Rose swallowed hard. Someone was waiting outside the wall. Inspector Hale leaned forward sharply. A man? I couldn't see clearly. Rose pressed trembling hands together. It was foggy. Interesting indeed. Fog concealed many things. But you saw Helena hand over the baby? Yes. Silence settled heavily again. Miss Marple folded her knitting quietly. So Lily Harrow's child survived at least briefly. Inspector Hale nodded grimly. And somebody removed the infant from Wycliffe House immediately after Lily vanished. Interesting indeed. The inspector rose slowly and paced toward the fire, which means Helena Wycliffe either tried protecting the child or hiding it, Edith finished uneasily. Yes, exactly. Miss Marple observed Rose Benton carefully. The woman still looked terrified, not merely frightened by old memories, frightened by something current. Interesting indeed. My dear, Miss Marple said softly, you've never told anyone this before. No. Why not? Rose laughed faintly without humour, because people who involve themselves with Wycliffe House always regret it eventually. Interesting answer. Before further questions continued, the telephone rang sharply in the hallway once more. Inspector Hale answered this time. Miss Marple watched his face carefully as he listened. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. When he returned, his expression had darkened considerably. They found blood near the abandoned cottage beyond the eastern woods. Silence. Edith whispered faintly. The schoolmaster. Possibly. Miss Marple rose immediately. You're going there now. Yes. My dear Inspector, she said gently, I believe I should accompany you. Hale hesitated only briefly. Then, I suspected you'd say that. The abandoned cottage stood roughly half a mile beyond Wycliffe Garden, hidden among dense woodland where ivy strangled ancient stone walls and broken windows stared blindly into darkness. Rain had eased slightly by the time they arrived, though mist still drifted heavily through the trees. A constable waited outside holding a lantern. Sir, Inspector Hale nodded, what exactly did you find? Blood on the rear steps. The constable lowered his voice instinctively. And signs someone stayed here recently. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple glanced toward the cottage carefully. Abandoned buildings rarely remain truly abandoned, especially near villages rich with secrets. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and smoke. Someone had lit a fire recently. A blanket lay folded near the hearth. Several empty food tins rested beside an old chair, and on the small wooden table near the window, a teacup still half full. Interesting. Inspector Hale examined the room carefully while constables searched upstairs. Miss Marple moved more slowly, observing. Always observing. Near the fireplace she noticed muddy footprints. Large, male perhaps, but another smaller set crossed partially over them. Interesting indeed. 2 people, at least. Then her attention shifted toward the table. Beside the teacup rested a folded newspaper dated 3 days earlier, and beneath it, a photograph. Old. Faded. Miss Marple lifted it gently. The picture showed Helena Wycliffe standing beside a young woman. Lily Harrow. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. But what caught Miss Marple's attention most was not the women themselves. It was the child seated between them, perhaps 2 years old, dark curls, large serious eyes, and unmistakably alive. Miss Marple's mind sharpened instantly, because if the photograph truly dated from shortly before Lily disappeared, then the child could not be Lily's unborn baby, meaning there had been another child hidden within Wycliffe House years earlier. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale noticed her expression immediately. What is it? She handed him the photograph quietly. The inspector stared. Good Lord. Quite. A constable appeared suddenly from upstairs. Sir, what now? We found someone. Silence crashed through the cottage. Inspector Hale moved instantly toward the staircase. Miss Marple followed more slowly. The upstairs room appeared little more than a dusty storage chamber beneath the sloping roof. Yet someone had occupied it recently. Fresh blankets, candles, and seated weakly against the far wall, the missing schoolmaster. Alive. Barely conscious, perhaps, but alive. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Edgar Bellamy blinked weakly against the lantern light. "Hale?" Inspector Hale crouched immediately beside him. "What happened?" The schoolmaster swallowed painfully. "He saw me." "Who?" Bellamy's eyes darted fearfully toward the window. "The man climbing the wall." "Interesting." Miss Marple stepped quietly closer. "Did you recognize him?" For several moments Bellamy said nothing, then weakly, "Yes." Inspector Hale leaned forward sharply. "Who was it?" But before Bellamy answered, a strange expression crossed his exhausted face. Fear. Real fear. Interesting indeed. He said nobody must reopen the garden. Silence filled the upstairs room. Inspector Hale frowned heavily. "What does that mean?" Bellamy shook his head weakly. "I don't know." Miss Marple studied him carefully. No, that wasn't entirely true. The schoolmaster knew something more, something he dreaded speaking aloud. "Oh, interesting indeed. Very interesting." "My dear Mr. Bellamy," she said gently, "someone attacked you because you witnessed them entering Wycliffe Garden." "Yes, and they were searching for something." The schoolmaster looked sharply toward her. "How did you know?" "Because frightened people return to old hiding places." Miss Marple's voice remained soft. "Especially when secrets buried there begin surfacing unexpectedly." Silence. Then Bellamy whispered, "The wall." Inspector Hale stiffened. "What about it?" The schoolmaster closed his eyes briefly. "There's another space inside." "Interesting indeed. Very interesting." "A hidden passage?" "No." Bellamy swallowed painfully. "A sealed chamber built into the old brickwork." The room fell silent once more. Miss Marple felt the shape of the mystery shifting again beneath her thoughts. A hidden chamber inside the garden wall. People climbing secretly through the gate. A missing girl. A hidden child. And now murder. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale spoke carefully. "How do you know about this chamber?" Bellamy hesitated. Then quietly, "Arthur Wycliffe showed me once." "Ah, there it was. Interesting indeed." The inspector's eyes narrowed. "Why would he do that?" "Because—" Bellamy's voice cracked faintly. "Because he thought someone was hiding there." Miss Marple went very still. "Someone, not something. Interesting indeed. Very interesting." "My dear Mr. Bellamy," she said softly, "who was Arthur Wycliffe searching for?" The schoolmaster looked toward her helplessly, then whispered, "His son." The hidden chamber, the journey back from the abandoned cottage passed in near silence. Rain drifted softly through the woods while Inspector Hale drove with both hands gripping the wheel more tightly than usual. Miss Marple sat beside him, quietly, observing, always observing. Edith Penrith, seated in the rear, had surrendered entirely to bewilderment. "Arthur Wycliffe's son," she murmured for perhaps the 5th time, "but the child died." "Officially," Miss Marple corrected gently. Interesting indeed. Villages often buried inconvenient truths beneath respectable announcements. Inspector Hale exhaled slowly. "If the boy survived, why hide him?" "Ah, exactly." Miss Marple looked thoughtfully through the rain-streaked window toward the distant outline of Wycliffe House. Because hidden children almost always existed for one of 3 reasons: inheritance, scandal, or protection. Sometimes all 3. Interesting indeed. By the time they arrived at the estate, dusk had begun settling heavily across Blackthorn End. Constables still moved through portions of the gardens where Lily Harrow's remains had been uncovered earlier that day. Lantern light flickered softly among the roses. The eastern wall loomed dark against the fading sky. Inspector Hale stepped from the motor car immediately. "Mr. Greaves." Samuel appeared from near the fountain carrying a lantern. His face looked even more exhausted than before. "Yes, sir." "You know this wall better than anyone." Hale pointed toward the eastern section. "Where's the hidden chamber?" Silence. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Samuel's weathered face tightened visibly. "I don't know what you mean, mister." Bellamy says Arthur Wycliffe showed him a concealed space built into the wall." The gardener looked sharply toward Miss Marple then. Fear again. Not surprise. Interesting. After several painful seconds, Samuel sighed heavily. "Come with me." He led them slowly through winding garden paths toward the far eastern corner, where climbing ivy thickened heavily over ancient brickwork. There. At first, Miss Marple noticed nothing unusual. Then Samuel pulled aside a curtain of ivy, revealing a narrow iron latch nearly invisible beneath the leaves. Interesting indeed. The gardener hesitated before touching it. This should have remained closed. Inspector Hale's voice hardened slightly. "Open it." Samuel obeyed reluctantly. A section of the wall shifted inward almost soundlessly. Edith gasped softly. "Oh, heavens!" A narrow hidden chamber existed within the wall itself, barely large enough for one adult perhaps. Stone bench, dust-covered blankets, and shelves built carefully into the brickwork. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple stepped quietly inside. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and old paper. Someone had occupied this place repeatedly over many years. Not recently, perhaps, but often. Inspector Hale examined the shelves carefully. There are books here, old novels mostly, several children's toys, and near the back corner, a tiny wooden horse worn smooth with age. Interesting. Miss Marple picked it up gently. Beloved toys carried stories. This was a child's hiding place, she murmured softly. Samuel Greaves stood rigid near the entrance. "No," Miss Marple turned toward him quietly. "My dear man. Children only leave toys where they feel safe." The gardener looked away immediately. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale discovered something else then, a loose brick near the floor. Behind it rested a bundle of letters tied carefully with faded blue ribbon. "Ah, interesting indeed. Very interesting." The inspector unfolded the first page slowly, then his expression changed completely. "What is it?" Edith whispered. Hale looked toward Miss Marple. "These are Helena Wycliffe's." Silence settled heavily through the hidden chamber. Miss Marple accepted the letters carefully. Most appeared written across several years. Private confessions, perhaps. The first pages described grief following her infant son's supposed death. But gradually the tone shifted. Arthur says the boy weakens daily. The doctor believes he will not survive winter. Yet I cannot bear losing another child. Interesting indeed. Miss Marple continued reading. Lily offered helping us. She says nobody would notice another infant arriving at the house after the war ended. Ah, there it was. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. The truth began unfolding rapidly now. Helena Wycliffe's child had not died immediately after birth. He had been hidden, replaced perhaps, protected from illness. Miss Marple read further. Arthur insists the arrangement remain secret until the boy recovers fully. The village must never know another woman nursed our son. Interesting. Because wealthy families guarded pride obsessively, especially concerning weakness. Then one final sentence sharpened everything entirely. Lily has become too attached to the child. Silence filled the hidden chamber. Inspector Hale spoke quietly. "My God." Edith looked utterly lost. "I don't understand." Miss Marple folded the letters carefully. "My dear Edith, Helena Wycliffe's infant son survived." Her voice remained gentle. "And Lily Harrow became involved in raising him." Interesting indeed. Very interesting, Inspector Hale frowned deeply. "But why hide the child inside a wall? Protection, perhaps." Miss Marple glanced around the narrow chamber thoughtfully. "Or concealment during illness." Samuel Greaves suddenly spoke harshly. "No." Everyone turned toward him. The gardener's eyes shone with anger now rather than fear. "They hid the boy because Arthur Wycliffe didn't believe he was truly his." Silence crashed through the chamber. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale stared sharply. "What?" Samuel laughed bitterly. Arthur suspected Helena loved another man during the war." "Ah, there it was. Human jealousy again. Always waiting beneath family tragedies." Miss Marple watched him carefully. "You knew all this personally?" "Yes." "How?" Samuel's face hardened. "Because I carried the letters." "Interesting. Not merely gardener, then. Trusted servant. Perhaps more." Before further questions continued, Eleanor Wycliffe's voice echoed sharply from outside the wall. "What are you doing here?" She stood near the entrance, pale with fury, lantern light catching the sharp angles of her face. Inspector Hale stepped out immediately. "We discovered the hidden chamber." Eleanor froze. "Interesting indeed. Very interesting." "You knew about it," Miss Marple said softly. The younger woman laughed once without humour. "Of course I knew." Her eyes drifted toward the tiny wooden horse in Miss Marple's hand. Mother showed it to me years ago. And the child? Silence. Then quietly. He lived there sometimes. Edith gasped. A child hidden inside a wall. Eleanor's expression twisted painfully. You make it sound monstrous. My dear, Miss Marple said gently, it was monstrous. Silence followed. Then Inspector Hale asked carefully, What happened to the boy? For the first time, genuine fear crossed Eleanor's face. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. He disappeared. Ah, there it was again. Always disappearances. When? Hale pressed. Shortly before Lily Harrow died. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened immediately. Interesting indeed. And Helena Wycliffe believed Lily took him. Eleanor nodded weakly. Yes. Did Arthur believe the same? No. Eleanor swallowed hard. Father thought someone else had already found the child. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Before anyone could continue further, sudden shouting erupted near the front gardens. A constable came running breathlessly through the mist. Inspector, Hale turned sharply. What now? The constable looked visibly shaken. We found fresh footprints beside Lily Harrow's grave. Silence. And? They lead toward the churchyard. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Because someone was still searching for something connected to the buried girl. Or perhaps someone. The boy who vanished. Blackthorn End churchyard lay wrapped in mist. Ancient gravestones leaned crookedly beneath dripping yew trees, while weak lantern light flickered across wet stone paths. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth and fallen leaves. Miss Marple always believed churchyards possessed peculiar honesty. The dead, unlike the living, no longer bothered pretending. Inspector Hale crouched near the muddy footprints beside the church gate. They came from the eastern gardens exactly as the constable said. Interesting indeed. The tracks appeared fresh despite damp ground. One person, heavy boots, moving quickly. Miss Marple followed the impressions carefully with her eyes. Toward the far corner of the graveyard, toward the older tombs nearly swallowed by ivy. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. What lies over there? She asked softly. The vicar, who had arrived moments earlier looking pale and deeply uncomfortable, answered quietly. The Wycliffe family crypt. Ah, interesting indeed. Of course. The group moved slowly through drifting mist until the crypt emerged between the yew trees. A heavy stone structure built generations earlier. Dark, cold, and partially hidden beneath climbing ivy much like the garden wall itself. Miss Marple noticed immediately that the iron door stood slightly open. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale drew a torch from his coat. Stay behind me. The crypt smelled faintly of damp stone and candle wax. Someone had entered recently. Very recently. Muddy footprints crossed the floor clearly toward the rear wall where ancient Wycliffe coffins rested beneath layers of dust. Then Inspector Hale's torch stopped abruptly. A figure sat collapsed against the far corner. Edith gasped softly. The missing schoolmaster? No. Different man. Perhaps mid-30s. Dark hair streaked with rain. Face pale from exhaustion. And unmistakably frightened. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. The stranger raised trembling eyes toward the lantern light. You found me. Inspector Hale stepped forward sharply. Who are you? Silence lingered several seconds, then quietly, Daniel Harrow. Miss Marple went very still. Interesting indeed. The surname mattered immediately. Lily Harrow's brother, perhaps. Or something else entirely. Inspector Hale clearly reached the same conclusion. Harrow. The man nodded weakly. Yes. Miss Marple studied him carefully. Not village-born, perhaps. His clothes suggested years spent elsewhere. Yet the eyes, those large, serious eyes, felt strangely familiar. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Then Miss Marple understood suddenly. The photograph. The hidden child. Ah. Inspector Hale spoke carefully. You've been hiding near Wycliffe House. Yes. Why? Daniel Harrow laughed faintly without humour. Because somebody started digging. Interesting answer. Not denial, not confusion. Fear. Miss Marple stepped quietly closer. My dear man, she said gently, who exactly are you? The stranger looked toward her for a long moment, then softly, I think I'm Arthur Wycliffe's son. Silence crashed through the crypt. Edith whispered faintly, "Oh, heavens." Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale's expression hardened instantly. Explain. Daniel leaned his head tiredly against the stone wall. My mother was Lily Harrow. And Helena Wycliffe? She raised me. Silence again. Miss Marple felt the final shape of the mystery beginning to emerge at last. Interesting indeed. Daniel continued quietly. After Lily disappeared, Helena took me from Blackthorn End. His voice remained calm, strangely enough. She said the village would destroy us both if people learned truth. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. And did Arthur Wycliffe know? Yes. Was he truly your father? Daniel hesitated. I honestly don't know. Ah, interesting indeed. Because uncertainty often poisoned families more effectively than certainty ever could. Inspector Hale crouched slightly nearer. Why return now? Daniel's tired eyes drifted toward the crypt entrance. Because Helena wrote to me before she died. Silence settled heavily once more. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened immediately. She contacted you recently. Yes. Why? Daniel swallowed hard. She said someone had begun searching the gardens again. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale frowned deeply. Searching for what? For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely frightened. She never explained. Miss Marple watched him carefully. No, that wasn't entirely true. Daniel knew more than he wished revealing. Interesting indeed. Then Inspector Hale asked the most important question. Where were you the night Helena Wycliffe died? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. In the garden. Silence. The inspector's voice sharpened instantly. You were there. Yes. Did you meet Helena? Daniel nodded weakly. She asked me to leave Blackthorn End immediately. Interesting. Why? Because she believed someone recognized me. Ah, interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple folded gloved hands thoughtfully. My dear Mr. Harrow, who exactly did Helena fear? Daniel stared toward the dark crypt floor. Samuel Greaves. Silence crashed through the chamber again. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale straightened sharply. The gardener. Yes. Why? Daniel hesitated painfully. Because Samuel knew the truth from the beginning. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Before further questions continued, sudden footsteps echoed outside the crypt entrance. Everyone turned sharply. Samuel Greaves stood there holding a lantern. Rain dripped slowly from his coat, and his face looked utterly exhausted. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. For several long moments nobody moved. Then Samuel spoke quietly. So she finally told you? Daniel rose slowly to his feet. You should have left things buried. The gardener laughed bitterly. Buried? His weathered face tightened with old pain. That family buried half their lives. Interesting remark. Miss Marple observed both men carefully now. The resemblance between them struck her immediately. Not physical, perhaps. Something subtler. Shared sadness. Shared anger. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale stepped between them slightly. Mr. Greaves, you'll explain exactly what's happening. Samuel ignored him entirely. Instead, he looked toward Daniel. She wanted protecting you. I know? No. The gardener's voice cracked faintly. You don't. Silence. Then Miss Marple spoke softly. My dear Mr. Greaves, Helena Wycliffe wasn't protecting Arthur's son at all. Samuel looked sharply toward her. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. She was protecting yours. Silence exploded through the crypt completely. Daniel stared. Inspector Hale stared. Even Edith seemed physically unable, breathing for several seconds. Samuel Greaves closed his eyes slowly. There it was at last. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Daniel whispered faintly, What? Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. You aren't Arthur Wycliffe's child. She glanced toward Samuel quietly. You're Samuel Greaves' son. The gardener's face crumpled slightly with exhausted grief. Daniel looked utterly stunned. That's impossible. No, Miss Marple said softly. Merely hidden. Inspector Hale frowned heavily. How did you know? My dear Inspector, Helena Wycliffe spent decades protecting this secret while allowing the village to believe Arthur fathered Lily Harrow's child. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Women rarely endure such humiliation willingly unless protecting something even more dangerous. Interesting indeed. Very dangerous indeed, Samuel finally spoke quietly. Arthur discovered Lily and me together? Ah, human jealousy again. Always. He threatened taking the baby once it was born, Samuel continued bitterly. Said no servant's bastard would disgrace Wycliffe House. Daniel stared helplessly between them. And Helena? She helped us hide you. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Because Helena Wycliffe had spent 20 years protecting another woman's child from her own husband. Not out of cruelty. Out of guilt, perhaps, or loneliness, or rebellion. Human motives rarely travelled neatly. Inspector Hale spoke carefully now. If Helena protected Daniel all these years, who killed her? Silence filled the crypt. Then Samuel Greaves whispered one dreadful sentence. Someone who discovered she planned telling him the truth. The truth. Helena feared the crypt seemed colder after Samuel Greaves spoke. Rain whispered faintly outside while lantern light flickered across ancient stone walls and tired, frightened faces. Someone discovered Helena Wycliffe planned telling the truth. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale broke the silence first. Who? Samuel looked toward Daniel helplessly. I don't know. No, Miss Marple thought quietly. That was not entirely true. Samuel suspected someone. Perhaps feared them. Interesting indeed. Daniel Harrow, or rather Daniel Greaves now, Miss Marple supposed, remained standing rigid beside the crypt wall as though the ground beneath him no longer felt trustworthy. My entire life, he whispered faintly. Samuel's face twisted painfully. I wanted telling you. Then why didn't you? The gardener looked suddenly old. Because Helena believed the village would destroy you if people learned truth. Interesting indeed. And perhaps she had been correct. Villages forgave wealth far more easily than poverty. Miss Marple stepped gently closer to Daniel. My dear boy, hidden identities rarely protect anyone permanently. Daniel laughed softly without humour. I'm beginning understanding that. Inspector Hale folded his arms. We still require facts. His voice hardened slightly. Helena Wycliffe was murdered. Someone attacked Edgar Bellamy, and Lily Harrow's body was buried behind the garden wall for 22 years. Yes, Miss Marple murmured thoughtfully, and all three events connect through fear. Interesting indeed. Fear of exposure, fear of shame, fear of inheritance perhaps. Then suddenly something struck her sharply. Interesting, very interesting indeed. Inspector, she said quietly, who inherits Wycliffe House now? Eleanor Wycliffe. And if Helena publicly acknowledged Daniel as Samuel Greaves's son? Hale frowned. It would destroy the scandal surrounding Arthur Wycliffe. More importantly, Miss Marple said softly, it would reveal Helena knowingly concealed a child connected to the estate for decades. Silence. Then Inspector Hale's expression changed completely. Interesting indeed. She planned changing her will. Exactly. Miss Marple nodded gently. My dear Inspector, wealthy women do not summon estranged hidden sons back to the village without intention. Interesting indeed. Very interesting, Samuel looked suddenly alarmed. She wouldn't have... Oh, yes, Miss Marple interrupted quietly. I believe she would. Because Helena Wycliffe had spent years living beside guilt, and guilt often demanded expensive forms of redemption eventually. Daniel looked shaken. She wrote asking me to come immediately, he swallowed hard. She said matters concerning my future needed resolving. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale turned sharply. Did you tell anyone about the letter? No. Miss Marple watched him carefully. Truthful, perhaps. Yet someone clearly learned of the meeting somehow. Interesting. Before further discussion continued, footsteps echoed faintly outside the crypt again. Constable Reed appeared breathless in the doorway. Sir, what now? We found something in Helena Wycliffe's study. Interesting indeed. An hour later they stood once more inside Wycliffe House. The atmosphere had changed subtly since Miss Marple first entered the manor. Not merely grief now, fear. Servants whispered nervously in corridors while doors closed quickly whenever footsteps approached. Secrets rarely remained stable once disturbed. Inspector Hale led them upstairs toward Helena Wycliffe's private study. Eleanor stood waiting near the desk, pale and visibly furious. "You searched Mother's personal papers without permission." The inspector remained unmoved. "This concerns a murder investigation." Eleanor's eyes moved toward Daniel immediately. Interesting indeed. Shock. Real shock. She recognized him. Very interesting. Miss Marple noticed it instantly. "My dear," she said gently, "you've met before." Eleanor hesitated. Then quietly, "Yes." Inspector Hale looked sharply between them. "When?" "Years ago." Eleanor folded trembling arms tightly. "Mother introduced him as a distant family friend." "Interesting indeed." Daniel stared toward her uncertainly. "You knew who I was?" "No." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Mother lied beautifully." Interesting answer. Not denial of suspicion, only certainty withheld. The inspector moved toward the desk. "We found this hidden behind a false panel." He produced a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For Eleanor. Interesting indeed. Very interesting." Inspector Hale opened it carefully. Inside rested several documents, a revised will and a handwritten letter. Miss Marple watched Eleanor closely as the inspector read silently. The younger woman's face drained slowly of colour. "What is it?" Daniel asked quietly. Hale looked up grimly. "Helena intended dividing the estate." Silence. "Half to Eleanor Wycliffe." The inspector paused. "Half to Daniel Harrow." Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "She told me nothing." Miss Marple observed her carefully. No grief over lost inheritance, only betrayal. Interesting. Inspector Hale continued reading Helena's letter aloud quietly. "I can no longer continue living beside Arthur's lies. Daniel deserves truth at last. Samuel deserves peace, and Lily deserves justice." Silence settled heavily through the study. Then Hale reached the final sentence. "If anything happens to me before Sunday evening, do not trust the garden." Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple felt a small chill move through her thoughts. Not trust the garden. Interesting wording. On gardens, concealed things, entrances, bodies, meetings, and perhaps people. Inspector Hale frowned deeply. What exactly was Helena afraid of? No one answered immediately. Then quietly Daniel spoke. "She told me someone had begun entering the grounds at night." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "The wall climber." "Yes." "And Helena believed they searched for something hidden there." Daniel nodded weakly. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Then suddenly Miss Marple noticed Samuel Greaves staring fixedly toward a portrait hanging near the fireplace. Arthur Wycliffe again. Interesting. The gardener's expression held not merely resentment now, hatred. Old hatred. Very old indeed. "My dear Mr. Greaves," Miss Marple said softly, "you loved Lily Harrow very deeply." Samuel looked away instantly. "Yes. And Arthur Wycliffe took both her and your child from you." Silence, then quietly. "Yes." Interesting indeed. Human grief again. Human bitterness. Powerful enough perhaps for murder. Inspector Hale clearly considered the same possibility. "Where were you during the fete Saturday evening?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Working in the Western Gardens." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No." Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Before the tension deepened further, Edith suddenly gasped softly near the window. "There's someone outside." Everyone turned sharply. A figure moved quickly across the dark rear gardens carrying a lantern. Inspector Hale reacted instantly. "Stay here." But Miss Marple was already watching the movement carefully. Interesting indeed. The figure headed directly toward the eastern wall, toward the hidden gate. Very interesting. Moments later, Hale and two constables disappeared into the darkness outside. Rain had begun falling again lightly. Miss Marple moved slowly toward the window beside Eleanor. For several silent moments they watched lantern light shifting through the gardens below. Then Eleanor spoke unexpectedly. "You think Samuel killed her?" "Interesting question." "My dear," Miss Marple replied softly, "I think Samuel spent 20 years protecting people who destroyed his life." Eleanor's face tightened painfully. "Mother wasn't cruel." "No." Miss Marple nodded gently. "I believe Helena Wycliffe tried repairing old damage." She loved Daniel. Yes. Silence lingered briefly. Then Eleanor whispered something almost inaudible. She loved him more than me. Ah, interesting indeed. Very interesting. There it was at last. Not inheritance, or not scandal. Jealousy. Human jealousy again. Quiet and poisonous as ivy creeping slowly over stone. Before Miss Marple could respond, shouting erupted suddenly from the gardens below. A gunshot followed immediately. Blood among the roses. The gunshot echoed across Wycliffe House like a crack splitting the night apart. For one suspended moment, nobody inside the study moved. Then Eleanor Wycliffe gasped sharply and rushed toward the door while Miss Marple followed more slowly behind. Lantern light flickered wildly outside across rain-darkened gardens. Voices shouted near the eastern wall. Somewhere among the roses a constable yelled for help. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. By the time Miss Marple reached the terrace steps, Inspector Hale had already disappeared into the shadows beyond the fountain. Rain fell harder now, silver against the darkness. Edith Penrith clung anxiously to the doorway behind them. Oh heavens! Oh heavens! Miss Marple moved carefully down the gravel path. Age, she reflected privately, became deeply inconvenient during murder investigations involving wet gardens and running policemen. Near the eastern wall she finally found them. A lantern lay overturned beside the rose beds. Constable Reed knelt near someone collapsed in the mud. Daniel. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale crouched beside him, grim-faced, while Samuel Greaves stood several feet away looking stunned beyond words. Blood stained Daniel's shoulder heavily, though Miss Marple noticed immediately the wound appeared non-fatal. Interesting. He's alive, Hale said shortly without looking up. Daniel winced weakly. He ran toward the gate. Who did? Hale demanded. But before Daniel answered, Miss Marple's attention shifted elsewhere entirely. Near the wall. Fresh mud disturbed beside the rose bushes. And there, a lantern half hidden beneath ivy. Interesting indeed. She stepped slowly closer. Something about the scene troubled her immediately. Not the shooting itself. The arrangement. Too hurried, perhaps. Too emotional, unlike Helena Wycliffe's carefully staged death. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Inspector Hale rose sharply. Constable, take Daniel inside. His eyes moved towards Samuel Greaves. You stay here. The gardener looked exhausted rather than frightened now. I didn't shoot him. No? Samuel shook his head bitterly. If I wanted someone dead, Inspector, I wouldn't miss. Interesting answer. Too honest, perhaps. Miss Marple quietly examined the overturned lantern near the wall. The glass had shattered outward. Interesting indeed. Which meant it likely fell before the gunshot rather than afterward. Someone surprised. Someone struggling in darkness. Then Miss Marple noticed something else. A footprint pressed deeply into wet soil beside the hidden gate, smaller than Samuel's boots. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. A woman, perhaps. Inspector Hale approached quietly. You see it too? Yes. The shooter may not have been Samuel. No, Miss Marple murmured thoughtfully. I don't believe so. Because Samuel Greaves carried anger like an old wound. Open, visible, yet Helena Wycliffe's murderer acted differently, coldly, carefully, interesting indeed. Suddenly a weak voice called from the terrace behind them. Inspector Daniel. Supported now by Constable Reed, pale but conscious. Hale moved toward him immediately. Who fired the gun? Daniel swallowed painfully. I couldn't see clearly. Why were you outside? Daniel hesitated. Someone sent me a note. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. A note? Daniel nodded weakly. Said they knew what Helena planned telling me. Inspector Hale's expression darkened instantly. Where is it? Daniel handed over a rain-soaked folded paper with trembling fingers. Meet me at the eastern gate tonight. Come alone. No signature. Interesting. Miss Marple studied the handwriting carefully. Deliberately disguised, perhaps. Yet certain habits remained impossible hiding entirely. Interesting indeed. Did you tell anyone about the note? Hale asked. No. Miss Marple glanced quietly toward Eleanor, standing pale beneath the terrace lantern. Interesting indeed. Her expression seemed not surprised. Fearful, perhaps. Very fearful. Inspector Hale followed Miss Marple's gaze. Miss Wycliffe. Eleanor stiffened instantly. Yes? Where were you when the shooting occurred? In the study. With Miss Marple? Yes. Interesting. True, perhaps, yet not complete. Miss Marple watched her thoughtfully. My dear, you recognize the handwriting. Silence crashed softly through the rain. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Eleanor's face drained slowly of colour. No, but too late. The hesitation betrayed her. Inspector Hale stepped forward sharply. You know who wrote the note. Eleanor looked suddenly exhausted. Because I've seen it before. Whose handwriting is it? For several seconds she said nothing. Then quietly, my mother's. Silence. Rain whispered heavily across the gardens. Edith gasped softly. But Helena's dead. Yes, Eleanor whispered bitterly. Which means somebody used her stationery deliberately. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple's thoughts sharpened instantly. Someone wanted Daniel lured toward the eastern gate, toward darkness, toward fear, and perhaps toward death. Yet the shooting itself felt impulsive, unexpected, interesting. Inspector Hale spoke carefully. Who had access to Helena's study? Everyone in this house eventually, Eleanor answered wearily. Interesting answer. Very truthful, perhaps. Then suddenly Miss Marple asked quietly, My dear Eleanor, did your mother ever tell you why she truly kept the eastern gate locked? Eleanor looked sharply toward her. No. Yes, she did. Silence. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. The younger woman's composure cracked visibly then. She said... Eleanor swallowed hard. She said father used the gate to meet people secretly. Lily Harrow. Yes. And others? Eleanor hesitated painfully. I think so. Interesting. Miss Marple moved slowly toward the wall itself. Rainwater slid down old brick while roses trembled softly in the wind. Arthur Wycliffe had used the gate for secret meetings. Helena discovered it. Then Lily disappeared. Years later, Helena died beside the same wall. Interesting indeed. Patterns mattered enormously in murder. Then something else struck Miss Marple suddenly. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Inspector, she said softly, where exactly did Helena fall? Hale pointed toward the rose beds. There. Miss Marple moved carefully to the spot. Stone path, low rose bushes, and directly beside them, the newer brickwork she had noticed earlier. Interesting indeed. She touched the wall lightly. Hollow. Ah, very interesting, Inspector Hale noticed immediately. What is it? This section was rebuilt. Yes, but not repaired after damage. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Closed. Silence. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Samuel Greaves looked suddenly alarmed. No. Miss Marple turned quietly toward him. My dear man, there's another opening inside this wall. The gardener stared helplessly at the bricks. Helena sealed it years ago. Inspector Hale stepped forward immediately. What opening? Samuel closed his eyes briefly. A passage. There it was. Interesting indeed. A passage leading where? Samuel's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Beneath the gardens. Silence crashed across the rain-soaked roses, because suddenly the hidden chamber no longer seemed merely a child's hiding place. It connected to something larger, something buried deeper beneath Wycliffe House itself. Inspector Hale called sharply toward the constables. Bring tools! Eleanor looked horrified. My mother said the tunnels collapsed years ago. Tunnels? Edith whispered faintly. Samuel nodded weakly. Old wartime shelters built beneath the estate. He stared toward the wall. Arthur used them for meetings nobody else knew about. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. And perhaps someone still used them now. Minutes later, constables began removing loose brickwork carefully beneath the rain. The hollow sound deepened. Then finally... Part of the wall shifted inward. Cold air drifted outward from darkness below. A narrow stone staircase descended beneath the garden. Miss Marple looked quietly into the blackness. Interesting indeed. Because somewhere below Wycliffe Garden, she suspected, waited the final truth Helena Wycliffe died protecting. Beneath Wycliffe Garden, the hidden staircase descended sharply beneath the eastern wall. Cold, damp air drifted upward, carrying the smell of the earth, stone, and something older still. The stale silence of places sealed too long from daylight. Inspector Hale took a lantern from Constable Reed. "I'm going down." Samuel Greaves stepped forward immediately. "I know the tunnels better than anyone." Interesting indeed. Miss Marple watched the gardener carefully. Fear remained in his face, but not fear for himself. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Eleanor Whitcliffe stood rigid beside the roses, staring toward the darkness below the wall, as though something from childhood nightmares had finally returned. "My father used those tunnels during the war," she whispered faintly. Miss Marple glanced toward her gently. "For what purpose?" Eleanor laughed softly without humour. Mother never fully knew. Her eyes lowered. Or perhaps she knew too well. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale motioned sharply toward two constables. "With me." Then he disappeared down the staircase into the darkness below. Samuel followed reluctantly. Miss Marple waited only a moment before quietly descending after them, despite Edith's horrified objections behind her. The tunnel beneath Whitcliffe Garden stretched farther than expected. Old stone walls curved narrowly through the earth, while moisture glistened along the ceiling overhead. Electric wiring hung dead and rusted from wartime years. Interesting indeed. The passage had once been carefully maintained, not merely shelter, used regularly. Miss Marple moved slowly behind the others, lantern light flickering across old crates and forgotten furniture stacked against portions of the walls. Then they reached a larger underground chamber. Inspector Hale stopped abruptly. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. The room contained far more than abandoned wartime supplies. There were recent footprints everywhere, fresh candles, food tins, blankets, and against the far wall, a desk. Someone had been living here, or hiding here. Miss Marple studied the chamber carefully. Unlike the hidden space within the wall, this room felt organised, intentional, a refuge maintained over many years. Interesting. Inspector Hale examined the desk immediately. Letters, dozens of them, some old, some recent, many written in Eleanor Whitcliffe's hand. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Samuel Greaves looked physically ill. She promised sealing this place forever. Miss Marple glanced quietly toward him. My dear man, Helena Whitcliffe never stopped protecting someone down here. Silence. Then Inspector Hale discovered something else. A framed photograph resting beside the lantern. Arthur Whitcliffe, and beside him, a younger Samuel Greaves. Interesting indeed. Not master and servant. Friends. Very close friends, perhaps. The inspector looked sharply towards Samuel. You knew Arthur before the estate employed you? The gardener closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Explain. Samuel's face tightened with old bitterness. We served together during the war. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Human loyalties formed during wartime often survived long after affection died. Miss Marple studied the photograph carefully, Arthur smiling openly, Samuel beside him, and behind them, another man partly hidden from view. Interesting. The face seemed vaguely familiar. Then suddenly, Miss Marple understood. Edgar Bellamy, the schoolmaster. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale clearly recognized him too. Bellamy knew about these tunnels all along. Yes, Samuel whispered. Silence settled heavily through the underground chamber. Then Hale asked quietly, what really happened to Lily Harrow? The gardener leaned tiredly against the stone wall. Arthur wanted Daniel taken away permanently after birth. His voice remained low and exhausted now. Helena refused. And Lily? She threatened leaving Blackthorn End with the baby? Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Arthur became furious, Samuel continued. Said the scandal would destroy the family. His weathered hands trembled slightly. That night near the eastern gate, they argued. Miss Marple listened quietly. No rehearsed lies now. Only grief. Arthur struck her, Samuel whispered. She fell against the stones. Silence. Inspector Hale spoke carefully. And died. Yes. Interesting indeed. Not planned murder, perhaps. Rage. Panic. Accident transformed into concealment. Human tragedy again. Then why bury her behind the wall? Hale demanded. Samuel laughed bitterly, because Arthur Wycliffe never believed consequences applied to him. Interesting indeed. Very true, perhaps. Miss Marple glanced around the underground chamber thoughtfully. So Helena helped hide the body? No. Samuel looked toward her sharply. She discovered it afterward. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. She threatened exposing Arthur, Samuel continued quietly. But then he told her he'd reveal Daniel's parentage publicly. Silence. There it was again. Fear, protection, and social shame. He said the village would destroy the boy, Samuel whispered, and Helena believed him. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. Yes, Helena Wycliffe had spent 20 years trapped between guilt and protection, guarding a dead girl's secret to save a living child. Interesting indeed. Then Inspector Hale asked the final necessary question. Who killed Helena? The chamber fell silent. Samuel looked genuinely bewildered now. I don't know. No, Miss Marple believed him. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Then suddenly a voice echoed softly from the tunnel entrance behind them. I think perhaps I do. Everyone turned sharply. Edgar Bellamy stood there pale and trembling, supported weakly by the stone wall. Interesting indeed. The schoolmaster descended slowly into the chamber. Inspector Hale frowned sharply. You shouldn't be out of bed. Bellamy ignored him completely. Instead, he stared towards Samuel Greaves. You told them about Arthur. Yes, but not everything. Silence. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Miss Marple watched the schoolmaster carefully now. Nervous hands, fear, and overwhelming guilt. Ah, there it was at last. Bellamy spoke softly. Arthur didn't bury Lily alone. Samuel stared. No, I helped him. Silence crashed through the underground chamber. Inspector Hale stepped forward sharply. You assisted concealing a body? Bellamy closed his eyes weakly. We were terrified. Interesting indeed. Cowardice now. Human beings frequently mistook cowardice for loyalty. Arthur said Helena would lose everything if the scandal emerged, Bellamy continued shakily. He convinced us protecting the family mattered more. Miss Marple studied him quietly. No, that was not the entire truth either. Interesting indeed. My dear Mr. Bellamy, she said gently, you weren't protecting Helena Wycliffe. The schoolmaster looked sharply toward her. You were protecting Arthur. Silence. Bellamy's face crumpled slightly. He saved my life during the war. Ah, there it was. Old debts. Always dangerous. Interesting indeed. Inspector Hale's voice hardened. Why attack Daniel? I didn't. Then who shot him? Bellamy looked genuinely confused. I thought Samuel did. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Then suddenly Miss Marple noticed something lying partially hidden beneath the desk. A woman's glove, torn at the wrist. Interesting indeed. The missing gardening glove from Helena Wycliffe's murder. She picked it up slowly, and inside the glove, caught within the torn lining, rested several strands of long, dark hair. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Not Helena's silver hair. Younger. Dark. Miss Marple looked up quietly toward Eleanor Wycliffe standing frozen near the tunnel entrance. Interesting indeed. This is because at last she understood something profoundly simple. Helena Wycliffe had not been killed for old secrets. She had been killed for a very recent betrayal. What the roses concealed. For several long moments nobody in the underground chamber spoke. Water dripped softly somewhere deeper within the tunnels while lantern light trembled against ancient stone walls. Miss Marple stood quietly holding the torn gardening glove. Inside its lining remained several strands of dark hair. Eleanor Wycliffe's dark hair. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Inspector Hale slowly turned toward her. Miss Wycliffe. Eleanor stood motionless near the tunnel entrance, pale as candle wax. Then, softly, I didn't mean killing her. Silence settled heavily through the chamber. Samuel Greaves closed his eyes. Edgar Bellamy looked suddenly ill. And Daniel, poor confused Daniel, simply stared toward Eleanor with exhausted disbelief. Inspector Hale's voice remained calm now. Tell us exactly what happened. Eleanor laughed faintly. A terrible sound. I suppose there's no point pretending any more. No, there wasn't. Interesting indeed. She descended the final steps slowly into the chamber. Lantern light caught the sharp elegance of her face, Helena's face perhaps once, before bitterness hardened it. "My mother summoned Daniel back because she intended giving him half the estate," Eleanor said quietly. "Half," her mouth twisted painfully, "to a stranger." "He wasn't a stranger to Helena," Miss Marple said gently. "No." Eleanor's eyes filled suddenly with old hurt. "He was the child she always wanted." Silence. Interesting indeed. Very interesting. Human jealousy again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Simply years of feeling unloved beside someone else's secret. "She spent my entire life protecting him," Eleanor whispered. "Even after Lily died. Even after Father died. Everything became about Daniel." Miss Marple observed her carefully. Not greed first. Pain. Real pain. People often underestimated how dangerous neglected love could become. Inspector Hale spoke quietly. "You confronted Helena during the fete." "Yes." "What happened?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "She said she was tired of lies." A tear slipped slowly down her face unnoticed. "Said she intended announcing the truth Sunday evening." Interesting indeed. "And you argued beside the Eastern roses." "Yes." "Because you feared losing the estate." "No!" Eleanor's voice cracked sharply through the chamber. "Because she looked at me like I was disposable." Silence. There it was at last. The true motive rarely involved money alone. Only wounded hearts imagined themselves replaced. "She said Father ruined all our lives," Eleanor whispered. Then she said protecting Daniel had been the only meaningful thing she ever did. Daniel lowered his eyes painfully. Miss Marple felt genuine sorrow then, not merely for Helena, for all of them. Entire lives poisoned by secrets nobody possessed courage to face honestly. Inspector Hale asked carefully, "And then?" Eleanor pressed trembling hands together. "She tried leaving." Her breathing became uneven now. "I grabbed her arm, she pulled away, we struggled near the wall." Miss Marple saw it clearly. The torn glove, the bruised wrist, the fall against stone. Interesting indeed. She struck her head," Eleanor whispered faintly. "At first I thought she'd only fainted." "But she died?" "Yes." Silence settled again. Rain murmured faintly overhead through layers of earth and stone. Inspector Hale's voice remained steady. "Why stage the accident?" Eleanor laughed weakly. "Because that's what this family always did." Tears filled her eyes fully now. "We buried things." Interesting indeed. Very true. "And Daniel?" Hale continued. "Why lure him to the gate tonight?" "I wanted warning him to leave before police discovered everything." "The shooting?" Eleanor shook her head sharply. "I never fired a gun." "Interesting. Very interesting indeed." Inspector Hale frowned deeply. "Then who did?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Samuel Greaves spoke quietly. "I did." Silence crashed through the chamber. Daniel stared. "You shot me?" The gardener looked devastated. "I saw someone struggling near the wall." His voice trembled slightly. "Thought Bellamy was attacking you in darkness." Interesting indeed. A mistake. Another terrible, frightened mistake. Inspector Hale exhaled slowly. At least that explains one mystery. Miss Marple glanced toward Samuel thoughtfully. No malice there. Only panic born from years of protecting everyone around him. Interesting indeed. Very human indeed. Then Edgar Bellamy whispered suddenly, "All those years." Everyone turned toward him. The schoolmaster looked utterly broken now. "We could have ended this decades ago." "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "You could." Silence. Then Bellamy asked the question haunting all of them now. "Would Lily have forgiven any of us?" Nobody answered, because some questions carried no comforting reply. 3 days later, autumn sunlight returned gently to Blackthorn End. The rain had finally passed, leaving the village washed clean beneath pale golden skies. But villages, Miss Marple reflected, never truly became clean once secrets surfaced. They simply learned living beside truth afterward. Wycliffe Garden stood strangely quiet now. Police investigations continued formally, though Inspector Hale privately admitted Eleanor Wycliffe's case would likely be viewed as manslaughter rather than deliberate murder. "Juries understand family misery," he remarked grimly. Perhaps they did. Miss Marple sat beside the eastern rose beds one final afternoon before her departure from Blackthorn End. Workers had already begun sealing the underground tunnel permanently. The hidden chamber inside the wall remained empty now. No more frightened children. No more buried secrets. Interesting indeed. Samuel Greaves approached slowly, carrying gardening gloves beneath one arm. He looked older than when she first met him. Lighter too, perhaps. Grief exhausted people. Truth sometimes freed them afterward. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said quietly. "Yes." They stood silently beside the roses for several moments. Then Samuel spoke again. "Daniel's staying a while." "Interesting indeed." "Good." "He says someone ought remembering Lily properly." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Yes." Because at last the village finally remembered the girl buried behind the wall, instead of merely the wealthy family surrounding her tragedy. Justice arrived strangely sometimes. Samuel looked toward the garden thoughtfully. "Helena loved these roses." "Yes." "She spent years trying repairing what Arthur destroyed." His weathered face tightened sadly. "But she never understood you can't protect people forever by lying to them." "Interesting indeed." Miss Marple glanced quietly toward him. "My dear Mr. Greaves, human beings confuse silence with protection remarkably often." "Yes." They watched autumn wind move softly through the rose beds. Then Samuel asked one final question. "How did you know about Eleanor?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "My dear man, neglected daughters are far more dangerous than hidden sons." "Interesting indeed. Very true, perhaps." The following morning Miss Marple's train departed Blackthorn End beneath clear autumn skies. Edith Penrith waved energetically from the platform while Inspector Hale stood nearby looking less exhausted than usual for the first time in days. And farther back near the station gate stood Daniel Greaves beside Samuel. Father and son, awkwardly united after years stolen from them both. Interesting indeed. As countryside rolled past beyond the carriage window, Miss Marple folded her hands quietly in her lap. Human beings buried many things. Bodies, letters, truths, sometimes even love itself. Yet secrets resembled roots beneath old garden walls, hidden for years perhaps, but always growing silently underneath, waiting, and eventually, always eventually, something cracked. A loose brick, a forgotten gate, a frightened daughter, and suddenly the entire carefully tended garden split open at last. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly as the train carried her farther from Blackthorn End. Behind her, the roses of Wycliffe Garden still bloomed beside the ancient wall where so many lives had been hidden. But now, at least, the garden no longer belonged to fear, and somewhere beneath the autumn sunlight drifting softly across the estate, Lily Harrow's memory had finally been brought out from the shadows where others buried her long ago. Not forgotten anymore, not hidden behind the wall,